I'm Bob Linscheid. I'm chair of the our vice president of Opportunity Task Force for EBLC, and it's great to see all of you. Those of you that were on the EBLC board, we met in person on Friday at Asset Mark in Concord. It was a great meeting, great to see people in person, and I yearn for the opportunity to do that more as we move along, right? So let's do introductions, brief introductions, please. Mike McGill, why don't you start us off with a great example?
Hi, I'm a board member at Central Contra Costa Sanitary District and a longtime member of the council.
Great, thank you. Sarah.
Everyone, my name is Sarah Stockowitz and I'm new to this group. I'm the Director of Government and Community Affairs with John Muir Health. So I know John Muir Health has deep, long roots with East Bay Leadership Council. I joined in January of 2021. So kind of came in midway through during the pandemic, and I'm excited to get to meet more folks as we all start to be able to gather.
Great, thank you, welcome. Cindy Hatton.
Hi, I'm Cindy Hatton, President and CEO of Hospice of the East Bay. Obviously, we provide hospice and palliative care services to people in our community, which is Contra Costa and Alameda counties.
Great, I'm going to call out three in a row and we take it from there. Albert, followed by Bob, followed by Sheila.
Hello, my name is Albert Garcia and I'm with the Contra Costa County Library. I'm a librarian working with adult services, so I help coordinate programming and for all of our 26 libraries, and I'm currently in the administrative offices in Martinez, and I'm brand new to this group, so I'm looking forward to working with you.
Great.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Redlow. I know most everybody on the call. I work with the Contra Costa Workforce Board, coordinating health training programs and health workforce programs. I also run an employer partnership used to be called the East Bay Health Workforce Partnership, now called the Bay Area Health Workforce Partnership. And I'm also a member of the California Workforce Development Board.
Great, thank you. Hey, Sheila. I'll come back to you, Sheila, if that's all right. Mariana, followed by Betty, followed by Jim.
Good afternoon, Mariana Moore with the Ensuring Opportunity Campaign. Glad to be here.
Great.
And Betty Geisher-Cantrell with Spark Point Contra Costa.
And Jim Becker with RCF Connects, the Regional Community Foundation in Contra Costa County.
Great. And the last person on my Zoom is Elaine.
Hey everyone, I'm Elaine Truth. I'm with Visit Concord. I've been with East Bay Leadership for probably over 4 years, and a big fan though for many, many years. So, and I work under Bob with the Economic Development Opportunity Task Force Reinvented.
Great. And Lindy, I don't know, did you introduce yourself?
I didn't. Hi, I'm Lindy Johnson. I'm the policy director here at the East Bay Leadership Council and staff to the Opportunity Task Force. And I just wanted to say, you know, this is a whole team effort. So I wanted to thank Sarah for joining our planning team and just mention that Sheila, Elaine, and Cindy and Bob and I all get to meet and kind of plan these meetings together. And one of the things that we look forward to is hearing from all of you about topics you think might be particularly relevant or a speaker that you might want to suggest. So please feel free at any time to shoot me an email if somebody comes to mind. I also have a quick poll. Bob, would you mind if I launched that?
Could I introduce your boss first?
Oh, hi, Kristen. Absolutely.
So Kristen, you do a better job of introducing yourself than I do. So go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Kristen Connolly, President and CEO of the East Bay Leadership Council, also charter member of the Lindy Johnson fan club. So excited to be here for the task force today.
Yeah, go.
I think I'm more of a charter member. We had her first.
That's right.
What a good day for me, y'all. This is great.
Sheila's having difficulty with her.
I'm good now.
technology.
I can.
Yay.
I'm on. Yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
there you are, Sheila.
My mic had disconnected and wouldn't reconnect for some reason. Hi, everybody. I'm Sheila Hassel-Hughes. I'm the Dean of the School of Liberal Arts at St. Mary's College in Moraga. I'm a member of the board and the planning team for this task force. And I'm, since Bob invited us to talk about what we're working on. I'm always working on a program in our school we call the Liberal Arts Bridge Program, which provides professional development, exploration, and preparation programs specifically for liberal arts majors. So we're always looking for internship pathways. We offer a scholarship that supports students in internships that would otherwise be unpaid or underpaid, especially with nonprofits and public sector organizations. So if that's of interest to you, I'd love to connect.
Awesome. Thank you, Sheila. All right, Lindy, take it away.
Thank you, sir. So I'm going to launch a quick poll. It's multiple choice. You don't have to pick just one answer. And it's also just kind of meant to get you thinking. So if there is something that you see on this, or if you see something on this list and it sparks an idea to something related, please feel free to put it in the chat. I'm just trying to build a list of some potential future topics. Our planning team will be meeting in the next few months to talk about what we're going to cover in the summer and possibly even into the fall. And having some idea of topics that are of interest to folks kind of helps us think through that planning. So if you have a moment, hopefully this will show up on your screen. Just feel free to look at some of these and see if there's any that spark your interest. Again, you don't have to vote for just one. And if you're not sure what ECE is, that stands for Early Childhood Education.
Christy, what does Lindy, sorry, what does expanding medical mean?
Sorry, that should say expanding Medi-Cal. There's an effort happening at the state right now to expand Medi-Cal. Just trying to kind of offer whether or not folks are interested in kind of talking more through what that would look like.
I only saw one page. Is there 3 or 4 pages?
No, sir.
Just
But
kidding. Just
again, Bob, if you think of something that you feel would be really exciting, please throw it in the chat. Okay, this is really helpful. Thank you so much. I will share results just so you all can kind of have a quick view as well. But I'll take this again to our planning meeting and hopefully we can think through where there was some consensus and how we might be able to expand on what these results are showing us. Okay. I'm excited that there's a lot of interest in community college workforce development because actually Kristen recently gave a presentation at Los Medanos College in part around some of the workforce development work that they're doing and kind of thinking through. Kristen, do you want to talk briefly about that at all? Not to put you on the spot, but.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I was invited out to present to Los Medanos faculty about what are some trends in the economy right now? What should they be keeping in mind in terms of growing or contracting businesses? And it was an opportunity to talk about what we're seeing, what we know and what we don't know in this moment. And it was a nice exchange. So they have, Los Medanos does put out some good research about what's cooking in the economy. So it's always hard to, good data is hard to come by. And so yeah, just appreciated that opportunity and nice to lean on my team to help put that slide together on a day when I was otherwise enjoying the East Bay Women's Conference. So yeah, so it was a great opportunity.
Thanks, Kristen. Another thing that we've certainly seen a lot of articles come out about recently relates to enrollment at community colleges, and that might be another topic for us to talk a little bit about, particularly how 4CD is seeing and what their thoughts are on kind of addressing that here locally. I actually saw that the larger body that oversees our community colleges here in the state are trying to address the kind of lack of data sharing that can happen within the community college system. While it is one system, it's actually pretty jagged in how it data shares. So that is another thing that I know is being kind of talked about at that level and may even be something we see talked about kind of at the state legislation. So glad to see that there's some interest there. Thank you for taking the poll. Bob, I have a slideshow to go over that talks a little bit about the shared prosperity report and then dives into some legislation, but I'm going to look to you in case there's anything you wanted to cover before we jump into some of that. And then my hope is that afterwards we'll do member updates and that all of you can maybe talk a little bit few minutes each about what you're working on, kind of what initiatives you're paying close attention to, and particularly any legislation that has come across your desk or that you'd like the State Leadership Council to consider. This is the time of year that we really start to dive in. And in fact, some of the legislation that I'm going to talk about today doesn't have a bill analysis yet or isn't even set for a committee hearing, or the committee hearing is quite far off. So it's even still a little early on some of this, but we'd love to know if there are bills that you all are following or paying attention to, or even just budget asks that you've been paying close attention to. Bob, was there anything you wanted to cover before I dive into that?
Go for it. That helps unpack the direction we're going. So please.
Okay, awesome. So I'm hoping that all of you have, through our newsletter or one of the other many EBLC outlets, heard of the Shared Prosperity Report. It's a report that we did at the Contra Costa Economic Partnership side of our shop and that we've presented to our board in February. There's a website that we've set up for it. Mark did a great job creating a kind of a digital first approach so that you can scroll through that report right on the website. And I will link that here. But what I really wanted to review with all of you as a group is the recommendations that we put forward in that report, in part because I'd love your feedback on which of these recommendations you would like to see the Opportunity Task Force work on, and how we might engage with those recommendations. For example, I will say as a quick prequel, I suppose, is just that some of them relate pretty closely to housing and will likely be something we talk about at our housing task force. But that doesn't mean we can't also talk about it here or do a task force in which we meet with the housing group and kind of come together to think through what this recommendation might look like or how we might be more engaged with Contra Costa County as they look at how to implement some of those recommendations. So looking for feedback, excited to get some. But first, I will just kind of scroll through them so that those of you who haven't seen it will know what the recommendations are. And those of you that have can have a quick reminder. Give me 1 second to kind of share my screen. Okay, can you all see that?
Yeah.
Perfect. So this is a quick presentation on the recommendations that we put forward. So the first recommendation was around targeting local money. This was probably the recommendation we spent the most time on at the Equitable Economic Recovery Task Force. Many of you engaged in that task force in one way or another, and we really appreciate you being involved. These were the recommendations that came forward specifically around Measure X, and we actually got to present to the Measure X Community Advisory Board, which Mariana Moore chaired. Thank you, Mariana. Though most of our presentation was around guaranteed income, what guaranteed income pilots look like, why they're a good use of funds, particularly funds that have some flexibility like the Measure X funding did. But we did also talk about early education, economic development, and workforce development. Unfortunately, Measure X is not at this time going to go towards guaranteed income pilots, nor is there going to be a lot of money towards the Workforce Development Board, which is unfortunate. But there is going to be money in early education. So we were excited to see that there will be this investment in additional slots. And while there aren't specifically incentive grants that are going to be tied to professional development, there is a concentration on professional development and kind of the needs of that workforce, which I saw in the poll that we just did that there's definitely an interest in continuing to talk about that, which is great because it's something that I think here at the East Bay Leadership Council, we've really grown in our knowledge of and expertise of. And I appreciate Bob really engaging with Melissa a few years ago, Melissa Stafford Jones, excuse me, who was leading the Lesher Center at that time, and really bringing this to the forefront in our priorities here at the East Bay Leadership Council. The next recommendation was to use trusted messengers. This really came out of a recognition from a lot of folks in the Equitable Economic Recovery Task Force that who delivers a message can be very important, and that oftentimes messages don't reach folks because they're either not connected to an institution that's distributing that information, or it's not being distributed through channels that they trust and feel confident in. And here in Contra Costa County, Supervisor Diane Burgess actually hosts an East County Contra Costa nonprofit roundtable, which we thought could be a really good model, sort of asking each supervisor to really connect with the organizations that are highly present in their district, in their area, and trying to make sure that new nonprofits are constantly being brought in, and that perhaps it's not even a formal nonprofit, perhaps it's just a community group or an organizational group, or even a church, but that can be a messenger, particularly for county programs as they are new and developing, and or as those programs are looking for community feedback or to host and hold listening sessions. The next recommendation was around deepening employer support. We heard about this a lot at the Equitable Economic Recovery Task Force. And so we built a recommendation around ways that the county could engage in small businesses or businesses in general that included mentorship programs, technical assistance, and partnering really in all ways with work-based learning initiatives. We did a half-day convening on work-based learning when we had the Equitable Economic Recovery Task Force kind of up and running. If anyone is interested, actually, we can share that. But a lot of what came out of that was just how important this is from an equity standpoint. And it's exciting to hear that that's something that St. Mary's College is looking to address and sort of saying, like, we have scholarships if this isn't already a paid opportunity, because the ability for someone to be paid while they're interning or conducting work-based learning is so important. So our hope was that the county would invest in trying to strengthen those partnerships. WIOA, which is federal funding, does allow for there to be sort of this work-based learning opportunity and for the Workforce Development Board to use those funds to reimburse employers. Unfortunately, it's a very cumbersome process. And I think it discourages a lot of employers from engaging. And so there is an opportunity perhaps for the East Bay Leadership Council and the Contra Costa Economic Partnership to think through what a program might look like that wasn't quite as cumbersome as the current WIOA program might be. The next recommendation was to invest in job growth. So this is really about continuing to support the initiatives that are already underway, including the Northern Waterfront Economic Development Initiative. But there's a whole strategic plan around that. And it may be a great topic here for the Opportunity Task Force to kind of understand what they've been doing and where that strategic action plan sits currently, as well as to continue to invest in energy transition job training programs and some of the work that is occurring around that. There was actually $7,500 there is $7,500 that is coming to Contra Costa County to do some work around this. They're calling it just transition. There's some different feelings and opinions about that terminology. So we tend to go with energy transition job training. But either way, it is something that Contra Costa County is going to be specifically working on, that they have gotten funding for. They got it through the federal budget process. Mark DeSonia actually put in for those funds. So we'll be paying close attention to this, and it might, again, be a great topic of conversation here at the Opportunity Task Force. Next recommendation was to expand part-time work. And this came out of some research that was done kind of later in the pandemic that found that a lot of folks left the workforce, particularly women, due to caregiving needs, both their children's caregiving needs and perhaps older adults or family members' caregiving needs. And that part-time work could really provide some flexibility for folks and could be really instrumental in getting people back into the workforce, again, particularly women who may have left during COVID-19 or who were concerned about coming back into the workforce and not having the same flexibility that they were afforded during COVID-19, whether that was because of work from home or other factors. So Contra Costa County could be a leader in this and could certainly look at some of the positions that they hold and see if there's an opportunity for, instead of hiring someone full-time, hiring 2 people part-time. There is a cost to that because part-time employees receive benefits. But I think in a lot of ways, that's one of the reasons that Contra Costa County could be a leader in this. So it'll be interesting to see whether there is interest by the county themselves. We also included a recommendation that the Commission for Women and Girls would be an excellent partner in exploring this and working with them to kind of look at the data that already exists around it and kind of maybe deepening this recommendation based on what information the county themselves would share. Okay, the next recommendation is a focus on equity. And again, in putting these recommendations together, we tried to highlight places where the county was already doing work, already had an investment, was already thinking about some of these issues. And one of them was in recognizing that there was this Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice being stood up. We thought that would be a great space to hopefully examine racial disparities in local industry sectors and to ask them if they could make recommendations on how to strengthen some of those pipelines to employment. Perhaps looking at like what work-based learning programs already exist in high schools. There's actually a great program in Contra Costa County that specifically partners with West County School District to try to create stronger pathways and pipelines to healthcare careers. So is that something that could be replicated? What would replication look like, and where would support need to come from for something like that to occur? We have heard some feedback that the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice might not be the best place for this. In part because that department is still kind of being stood up and looking at exactly what their asks might be. So it's possible that if the board is open to engaging in this, they might not use this office. Of course, that's totally up to the board, but we thought that hopefully it might be something that at least that office would be interested in engaging on and being part of. So the next recommendation was around supporting financial literacy and access. And actually, we wrote a letter to Senator Skinner's office a few weeks ago, kind of talking about this recommendation in particular and how we thought it was something that the state themselves could look at, essentially just suggesting that the county really take an active role in connecting those who benefit from being employed by the county to strengthen their access to direct deposit, or to more actively encourage that they utilize direct deposit. We have a great nonprofit partner who was recently telling us that they worked with the San Francisco Unified School District and found that 30% of the employees at that school district were not utilizing direct deposit, which is a pretty high number. And often those who don't utilize direct deposit are either not engaged with a bank or don't have a very strong relationship with a financial institution. And there's good research to support that being, having linkage to a bank account is generally a positive thing and helpful for folks. And so this seemed like a pretty easy opportunity for the county to just engage with their employees, particularly some of their new employees, and or to just look at the utilization of direct deposit amongst their employees. The recommendation also really it comes from a recognition that we had in doing the Equitable Economic Recovery Task Force, that a lot of folks, particularly folks that were running small businesses or were entrepreneurs, didn't really feel connected to a bank when they went to apply for a paycheck protection loan, or didn't really trust that that loan would be forgiven, and weren't really sure who to talk to about that program. And I think that that's unfortunate. And I think we saw in the numbers around paycheck protection loans how that played out. And so this recommendation is also around making sure that should this be something that is taken up again in the future, that more folks are connected to a financial institution so that they can hopefully benefit from the programs that are put forward, like the paycheck protection program. One way to do that would be to include some education or some like connection to those who are already involved in county programs to other financial institutions within the county. So for example, having a credit union perhaps come in and give a presentation at the Workforce Development Board on Tuesdays, or just giving folks who are utilizing county services a quicker or perhaps easier connection to a financial institution. I should also mention one quick thing here, which is that banks often do have pretty large community funds and are pretty engaged in wanting to do financial inclusion work. So I think there's also just some stronger partnerships that could probably exist. So these next two recommendations centered around housing, and they came out of a lot of the work we did at the end of the Equitable Economic Recovery Task Force. Our last webinars concentrated on housing. And we really talked to a few different organizations as we built out those webinars and heard some pretty consistent things, which helped to shape these recommendations. The first is to consider using some of the newly created Housing Trust Fund dollars for grants or interest-free loans for down payment assistance. Essentially, this is about enabling homeownership in communities with a history of housing discrimination or redlining. As many of you have probably seen, the East Bay Times has an article out right now kind of showing just how unaffordable the Bay Area housing market is. So I think there's certainly a question about whether or not down payment assistance would be, a quick solution in a market like this. But I do think it's still something worth exploring, and I hope that those who are leading the Housing Trust Fund effort do so and do continue to kind of look at some of these inventive approaches. There's also other housing trusts who have chosen to use some of their dollars this way, which is encouraging. The second housing-based recommendation was to preserve affordable housing, and hopefully in somewhat innovative ways. This really came out of a lot of conversations we had with Richmond Land, which is a community land trust here in Contra Costa County, who have been really exploring some kind of innovative approaches and really been thinking about collective ownership and rehabilitating perhaps affordable housing that already exists, or using public land for some creative housing solutions, including tiny house communities or tiny home communities. So that's why we kind of highlighted Richmond Land as an excellent partner in this effort. Thankfully, I know Contra Costa County and DCD, Department of Conservation and Development here in Contra Costa County, is already working pretty closely with Richmond Land. So hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about what that partnership produces as this kind of process of developing this housing trust continues. So the last and final recommendation was about investing in data collection. When we were creating the Equitable Economic Recovery Task Force and coming to the group with presentations and data and information, we often found it to be challenging to gather information that Contra Costa County had produced. The best way to get information was often to go into their agenda system and try to figure out which committee someone had done a presentation at. And that's just not the best way for that information to be stored. I think there's actually a pretty shared opinion on that in Contra Costa County. And I know that we're not the first organization who's kind of run into that challenge. When we brought this up at the Contra Costa Economic Partnership, where the county administrator for Contra Costa County is a member of that board, she was really receptive to this and had talked about how it was something that the county has been looking into and thinking about as well, which is really encouraging. But I think it's important that organizations like ours continue to talk about the importance of that and pay attention to whether or not that's developed. So, my hope is that we as an organization will continue to look into that and to ask, like, how is that going? What's coming of that? Who might be taking the lead on it? Because just paying attention and asking questions can be pretty impactful in that regard. Okay, I have a few more slides to talk about legislation and sort of some of the things that are happening in the state, but I'm going to stop sharing and actually hopefully open it up a little bit. Absolutely, Bob, I'd be happy to share the PowerPoint. But I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts about those recommendations or any reflections on ways that we as an organization, and certainly as a task force, can engage in some of these recommendations, or ones that you'd like us to really highlight, perhaps as a planning team, to look into more.
So I want to welcome Patience from Contra Costa Workforce Development Board. Hey, Patience, nice to have you. Please, folks, feel free to chime in an orderly fashion. Bob, did you have some feedback? I thought I saw your hand go up.
I just have to take myself off now. Yeah, my hand went up because I waved to Patience, but but since you called on me, I'll just say, I mean, all of those recommendations are so important to our work and things we've been talking about for the past year. I did think that we also included a piece on continuing to increase the local health workforce in those recommendations. Maybe it was a sub-recommendation of one of those groups, but I know that we had talked about it, and I thought I saw it on the PowerPoint that you sent out prior to this meeting as well. And that's, of course, always important. But I think, the partnership with our employers is so important, and any work that any organization that we belong to or work with is so important to help facilitate that. I mean, I'll talk about this later, but we're doing like an EMT program and a paramedic program, which is new in terms of the needs of healthcare delivery. And we're partnering with a new partner, AMR, American Medical Response, which is the largest ambulance company contracted with Contra Costa, employs hundreds and hundreds of health workers. And we didn't have that partnership a year or two ago, and now we have that partnership, and they're so involved and they want to hire the local community because of cultural competence and the work that they do. So those kinds of partnerships, I think, are so important. So just to demonstrate the need for those type of partnerships and the work that we do in bringing those partners together, I just think that's really important.
Great feedback. Thank you, Bob. Anyone else? I'm sure Cindy Hatton backs you up on that. And Sarah from John Muir. Yes, Mariana, please.
Thank you. So I had comments on, I think the report is great, and thank you and congratulations. It's really strong, and I love the equity-centered approach to thinking about the business and county and community intersections. I just want to lift that up and say thank you. And then I had two comments on specific goals. One is on the housing task force, trust fund, I always get that wrong. I've been in conversation with DCD leaders around sort of democratizing and opening up the planning process. It's been fairly internalized for understandable reasons so far. And one of the ideas that they're considering is creating a technical advisory body And then there's many other ways that residents that are impacted by housing, the housing crisis, and nonprofit, affordable housing and other partners. So I just think it's a really important thing to note. And I would imagine EBLC, I'm sure you're having conversations as well, but I think having, you support that sort of opening up of that process. And, in general, the Measure X funding decisions are complete. And now the focus is moving to implementation. And I think as a equity-based stand, I think it's very important to have impacted community members and community-based providers sort of be at those planning tables for the new innovation fund, the housing trust fund. I just think that's very important to understand the systemic sort of where we are in the process and how do we get a seat at that table. And the other thing is, I was just laughing when you talked about the investing in data collection. I literally spent an hour on my computer today because I was talking to somebody from the state, a statewide agency that was involved in an education project in Pittsburgh. And she's like, can you, like Measure X, tell me about that. What did it fund in early childhood mental health? And even though I chair the group, I couldn't remember all the details. So I'm like, I'll send you some stuff. And then I spent an hour like looking on the Measure X site, trying to remember the date of the meeting, going to the county board of soups. I mean, it was insane and such a waste of time. And I found it, but it took like an hour. So I am strongly in support of the data collection. I think that's really brilliant and really needed. So thank you.
Can you send it to us also? We don't have to do the research.
Oh no, gotta do your own work, buddy.
Yeah. Jim, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So, one of the things that I learned early on from both Betty at SparkPoint and Mariana at Ensuring Opportunity was that if you're going to move people out of poverty, you help them build income. And if you're going to keep them out of poverty, you help them build assets. And so I think the idea of either expanded down payment assistance or other home ownership strategies is going to be critical. And just as a quick FYI, we've worked with a couple of congregations locally. We've set up a Black Wealth Builders Fund. We've raised just under 300,000. So we have grants of up to 20,000 to provide down payment assistance to homeowners. We're trying to take some of these fiscal ideas statewide right now too. So, but yeah, definitely support that and think it's a great part of this strategy.
Super, thank you. Anyone else?
Can I ask a quick question of that, Jim? Have you all had any conversations with the county about like matching those grants?
Not yet, although it's not a bad idea. We know some cities have some down payment assistance programs that are specific to their jurisdiction. So if we have a match there, that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a good, thanks, Lindy. That's good. That's a good suggestion.
Well, I'm just thinking like if it was something that they were going to consider using the Housing Trust Fund dollars with, as we are recommending here, it'd be great to know there's already an organization who's kind of saying, look, instead of $40,000 each, you just do 20, we have 20, we can really make that money move a little farther. And then just if there is any information you have that we can help to disperse about how folks can apply for that or be involved, we'd love to have that. Please do.
Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Yes, Elaine.
I just want to say thank you. I think that was a very useful template. It's really just really easy to get the point across, and thank you for putting that information like that. It was very nice.
Super. Okay, it looks like we got that part covered, Lindy.
Okay, wonderful. Well, as I said, I'm going to put it in the chat, the website that we have. Actually, Kristen, would you mind doing that for me? Okay, thank you. That way, everyone, if you do want to visit the website or share it with friends, which would be great, you'll have the ability to do so. And again, I'll bring this up with the planning team so we can talk through kind of how we might continue to engage in these recommendations. It sounds like the group might be interested in hearing more about the Housing Trust Fund and kind of what that process might look like, particularly if there is going to be kind of a technical group put together. So certainly that would be an opportunity for us to partner with the Housing Task Force and perhaps do a joint meeting just on that, which I think would be really interesting. Okay, let me share my screen again. Okay, is everyone seeing that pretty large and clear?
Yeah.
Okay, sometimes it accidentally goes into that mode where you see all of the slides on the side. So, okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about legislation and would, again, really love to hear from all of you if there are certain things you are following. The only bill that I actually think we will support and don't need to take any action on is AB 1746. And the reason that we don't need to take action on this is it's kind of a repeat of a bill we followed last year, supported last year, worked in coalition on last year. We were actually part of a few different coalitions that tried to support this Cal Grant Reform Act. It was successful and then vetoed by the governor. There is some budgetary questions related to it. But there is also a lot of support. So it's a Cal Grant Reform Act. There is small differences between the bill from last year and this year's, but not substantial. Essentially, it would create a Cal Grant 2 program and a Cal Grant 4 program. Those of you who are familiar with the Cal Grant program will probably remember it used to be an A and B and a C and was somewhat confusing to navigate, especially how the awards themselves kind of came down. For example, for Cal Grant B, you got a smaller amount your first year, but you'd get a larger amount later years. Cal Grant C was not an entitlement. I mean, there was just a lot to navigate through. It also functions on a slightly different timeline than the federal grant process, which can also add a little bit to the confusion. Thankfully, there's only one application, the FAFSA, which is a great thing. And there has been efforts to make it so that almost every high school senior will likely apply for the FAFSA. But understanding that aid and making sense of it is still a bit complicated when you're just dealing with complicated programs. So this is partially about streamlining and making it a little clearer. It would align eligibility with the federal Cal Grant. As I mentioned, that unaligned nature can be a little confusing. It also, I think, would set the requirements to be more closely aligned with the federal Pell Grant program. It would address non-tuition expenses. This is the really big push about it. It doesn't just look at the cost of tuition. It also looks at some of the needs, particularly for community college students that are non-tuition related, and would create like a relatively small, but still hopefully impactful pot of money for needs that are not tuition. And it would also remove barriers for students to get aid they need to pursue their college and workforce training goals. Those barriers include age and income. So, I'm sorry, age and GPA. So previously, a lot of folks didn't qualify for Cal Grants or didn't get Cal Grant aid because of their age or how long they'd been out of high school. Or their GPA, they didn't meet the GPA requirement, which is particularly tough if, let's say, you graduated high school in one state, but are coming back to community college 10 years later, in a different phase of life, and your ability to apply for these grant fundings are dependent on kind of where you were at 18 versus where you might be at 28 or 38. And kind of understand why that might be a bit complicated and why folks have been working pretty hard to kind of have that re-looked at or re-examined. So again, this is AB 1746. I'm certainly open to discussion, but in conversations with Bob and Sheila, I think that we're fine to just move forward in a support position with this. The Real Coalition, which is the organization of all of the business organizations like ours throughout the state, is also supporting this bill. And so we will likely work with them in coalition in our support. Again, it's not the only coalition that we'll be working on with this because there are quite a few, including the Coalition for College Affordability. So before I move on, does anyone have any questions about AB 1746?
Do you remember what the veto message was when this one didn't go through?
I believe it related to funding, but I can double check and send it to you, Bob.
Okay. I'm just thinking that there's upwards of 2 billion extra, right? That's been identified in the state reserve fund. So in addition to everything that we've heard about, so it just seems to me if we can remove some of the barriers, older students, and that's where it would add a lot of value to this effort. So just one off there.
I agree. I just pulled it up and it doesn't look like I can pull up the veto message here. So yeah, I will happily send that to you.
No
but
problem.
It was vetoed. Okay. So the next bill I wanted to mention was AB 976. This is a bill to establish universal preschool in California. So last year, the legislator and the governor through the budget process adopted universal pre-K. So come 2025, all 4-year-olds will have access to pre-K, probably in most circumstances through their local elementary school. In fact, I believe that that actually required it be provided by the school district, though there may be some flexibility in that actual physical building and where that's housed. This is a little different in that it provides universal pre-K or universal preschool for 3 and 4-year-olds, but parents would have the option to send their children to a public elementary school provider or a community-based childcare provider. The idea behind that is that it would keep these community-based childcare providers in business and allow them to hopefully benefit from the same reimbursement that a public elementary school would see. This is going to be a tough one because it requires a budget allocation, and thus far the governor hasn't said that this is what he plans to spend dollars on, but that could certainly change over the next few months, and if it's something we are really passionate about here, certainly an opportunity for advocacy. Again, I think the Real Coalition is going to be taking this up and considering a position of support. We've talked a lot about childcare, I think, over the last year and just how impactful access to childcare is and how important it is on our workforce. And we're also at the same time seeing a lot of community-based childcare providers closing or not being able to stay in business, whether that's due to issues over the pandemic or they're losing some of their employees to these public elementary schools who are starting to hire for their TK and pre-K programs, but also folks just leaving the workforce because the pay is unfortunately low and not an easy career to sustain. So I think this is looking to address this, but it certainly doesn't address all of the issues around childcare providers here in California. The next bill I wanted to talk about is SB 886. And this is a bill that I'll be talking about in the Housing Task Force as well. It's a great crossover bill, but it makes exempt from CEQA student housing projects or faculty and staff housing projects that are being carried out on a public university on their land that is also owned by the public university. So a little duplicated there, but for some context, in the fall of 2021, there was 8,700 CSU students and 7,500 UC students who were on a wait list for housing. So there's also a great article in the East Bay Times today about UC Berkeley students and kind of looking at how they handle the lack of housing in their region that I think really speaks to this issue in crisis. It is a CEQA exemption bill, so it is looking to sort of carve out more and more exemptions and somewhat looking at who should have to address CEQA in building housing and who should be exempt. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how this moves forward, but I'm certainly interested in all of your thoughts and if you think this is something EBLC should take a stand on and be invested in. Again, I'll also be bringing it to our Housing Task Force before we bring it to the board if there is an interest in support.
Incidentally, I know this because of CSU, but campuses, the lead agency for CEQA is in fact the Board of Trustees, not the local jurisdiction. So for example, in Hayward, the Board of Trustees is the body that is responsible for CEQA, not the city of Hayward or the city of Concord. Just FYI for everyone.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful, Bob. And one question I did have in reading this, Sheila, was sort of what private universities' thoughts might be on this. You know, whether they might say, well, I think private universities should be included, or if they feel that they don't encounter quite the same issues around trying to develop housing on the land that they have. So if that's something that, you know, St. Mary's has any thoughts on, we definitely would love to hear that.
Yeah, I will inquire about that. I mean, one thing I know we've been looking at is a public-private partnership, which would not be on St. Mary's land, but could possibly be on our existing property. So yeah, I'll check into that.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Cool.
So those were the 3 bills that I wanted to bring forward, mainly because I felt like they were pretty transformative and because I think that we're certainly going to be hearing a lot of conversation around them. But as we all know, it's an election year. It's possible these will be dead next month. And I will happily be keeping you all abreast of that information. But I hope that they aren't, because I do think they're all pretty interesting and certainly bring forward some important conversations here in the state. With that said, Bob, I'm interested if there's folks who would like to see support. I'm also happy to bring back those 2 bills, 886 and 974, next month once there is more bill analysis and we have a little bit of a better sense of kind of how those bills are shaping forward. We don't necessarily need to take a position on them today, but definitely interested in the will of the group.
Okay. And any feedback folks have, we have about 10 minutes before we conclude. Any thoughts? I think it's important. Thank you for the update on those bills. I think the Cal Grant Reform Bill in particular, I think that's Medina's bill, who's higher ed from Riverside region. I think all three of them have legitimate EBLC on them relative to importance of our work together. So if none of you have any additional feedback on those three.
Can I just ask a question, Bob?
Yeah,
Lindy?
sure.
Thanks. Lindy, on the one related to CEQA, would that also include like KH districts that have a piece of land they might want to build teacher housing on or something like that? Or is it strictly student housing and UC kind of university focused?
The wording as it's currently stated is public university.
Thank you.
But I do believe there's another bill that is looking at kind of a similar exemption more broadly for student and workforce and faculty housing that would include K through 12. And I can try to get that bill number and perhaps bring it back in April. Unless, Kristen, you happen to know that off the top of your head.
Well, no, I mean, there's been a lot of
1602.
activity about that, and there have been small, like, there have been bills passed to make things easier for school districts to use surplus land for teacher housing, but and so it's a very live issue. It's an issue in my district, and especially at a moment where jurisdictions in their sixth CEQA or sixth RENA cycle are really looking for how they can meet the requirements. And so it's leading to some interesting discussions, and certainly we're keeping an eye on any new legislation that would help on that front, because it's just affordability crisis. Just when we think it's peaked, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. But you know that well, Jim.
One of the big issues, Jim, and related to that, excuse me for chiming in on this, it's fascinating that community colleges, which have equally demand for student housing, aren't really set up, a lot of them, to do it as the CSUs are. So we're seeing conversations between CSU campuses and their community colleges in their region talking about collaborating on providing for housing. And particularly San Francisco City and San Francisco State have had deep discussions. So I would expect that could happen at the K-12 level as well.
I will also just mention there's also a bill to create zero interest loans for community colleges, CSUs, and universities to build some of this housing as well. So it's kind of a different approach, but going through the budget to try to provide interest-free loans to try to incentivize some of this building as well.
Right.
It looks to me like, I'm looking at the bill language right now, it looks to me like faculty staff housing is included. Sorry, I must have misheard that, but it is public only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity. It sounds like there's definitely some interest on this bill. We'll definitely move forward with 1746. Again, that's already a bill that we've had as kind of a stated position of support for. It looks like there's interest in 886. So perhaps I'll bring that back in April for kind of a final decision about support, as well as 974, after I've also brought it to housing.
Good.
Okay, thank you. Bob, do you want to just kind of give everyone an opportunity to maybe talk about some bills they've been looking at? I know Sarah might have some. She's mentioned before that there's some that they're looking at, and sort of open it up.
Yeah, please, Sarah, I saw the smile. Go ahead.
Sure. I mean, I think that there is a ton of bills that we're tracking right now, but a few kind of priorities that I would call out that I know we've been looking at in particular, certainly the governor's budget and tracking on the care economy and the care workforce. To Bob's point, I think that there's going to be a real need for healthcare workforce and investment in that in the coming year. So excited and curious to see, what comes from that budget proposal. Particularly, we're hoping for some additional funding around GME. I think that having more residency slots is always really important. Certainly others as well, but a few that I would just flag that we're tracking on, certainly watching some of the conversations around white bagging, which is a kind of technical healthcare issue, but has to do with prescription drugs that are provided within the hospital setting, and making sure that that our hospital pharmacists know exactly what they're giving to cancer patients and other folks who are really sick. Also, some of the transparency bills around nurse staffing agencies, I think, are definitely something that we're watching as well. So there's others too, but those are a few that are top of mind for us right now.
Great, Sarah. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll just share that it's a spot bill right now, but we're sponsoring AB 2560 with the idea of expanding the social impact bond financing model that we've created and incentivizing cities and counties to use that financing tool statewide.
And that's 2560, Jim?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it's Assemblymember Bonta is running the bill for us.
Okay. Super. Thank you. Anyone else?
Bob, hi. Hello, everyone. Patience Ofodu. Sorry I was late, but I let Lindy know that we had another meeting going on, so I couldn't join you earlier. I just want to say that I'm very excited about this prosperity report that CCEP helped work with the Workforce Board and the EHSD to produce. We're very proud of it. Great work, Kristen and Lindy and team. We will be presenting this at the Business and Economic Development Committee meeting of the Workforce Board. So Lindy will be joining us on April 6th to do a presentation to the Workforce Development Board members on this. And just like this committee too, they will be looking at, recommendations and how they can move it forward. But as Bob mentioned, healthcare is a very big part of what we're doing going forward. And I may have missed this, it may have been said earlier, but CCEP is helping us with some task force and some thoughts on the healthcare, equitable healthcare career pathways and upward mobility and all that. And Bob is very much involved with Kristen, and we have other things in the works to help with the healthcare industry and build career pathways in healthcare. So again, looking forward to continued conversation. And again, sorry about my not joining earlier. I did send a message to Lindy. Thank you.
Yeah, it's okay. We made you chair of some committee when you weren't there.
Bob, I trust you to do that.
Okay, well, we're getting down to the last few minutes of our time together. Lindy or Kristen, do you have anything to send us off?
Well, I would just say, I hope that you consider joining us next Thursday when we have an in-person event in collaboration with Bob's organization, the Walnut Creek Chamber, the League of Women Voters, the chambers in Pleasant Hill and Concord as well, and the Industrial Association, to hear from the 5 candidates running for Contra Costa Supervisor in District 4. There's going to be a League of Women Voters moderator at the event. And we're going to stick with 5 candidates. We're going to stick pretty seriously to time, but the plan is to run the substance of the forum from about 4:15 after we make, thank sponsors and introduce things, about 4:15 to 5:30, and then a cocktail hour after from 5:30 to 6:30. So it's free to attend. It's a cash bar afterward. Although if you know a sponsor, they could probably hook you up with some drink tickets. So hope you will consider joining us in Pleasant Hill at that event. Do you have anything else, Lindy?
I don't. That was exactly what I was going to mention.
Oh, I do want to say we are updating our website. We actually are expanding part 3 of the leadership series on April 26th to actually be about expanding economic mobility in the Black and Latino economies. McKinsey has a new report out about the Latino economy in the US. And so rather than being focused on their report just about the Black economy, it's going to be more of a panel discussion. I'm going to be moderating it. and really looking forward to that. So that's part 3 of the leadership series, which is free for members, and it's midday as well. So 12 to 1:30. So hope you can join us for that.
Super. All right. Well, we're grateful for your attendance, everyone, and happy Monday, and have a great rest of the week. Thanks, Lindy and Kristen.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, thank you, Bob.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.